Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. We're entering peak hiking season in Washington. If you're hoping to hit the trails, you may have to try some new routes due to ongoing recovery from winter storm damage. Also, after a recent bear attack on Mount Si, keep safety top of mind. We'll hear more from Seattle Times Outdoors reporter Gregory Scruggs in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. If you don't already have tickets for tomorrow's Team USA versus Australia match, I have bad news for you. After USA's triumphant win against Paraguay last week, Seattle Times reports the average ticket price has jumped to more than $2,100. The cheapest ticket is more than $1,900. If you're looking for a more economical way to watch, the game kicks off at noon on Fox 13. Also, there are other ways to get into the World Cup spirit. Pike Place Market is hosting a Welcome to the World night market tonight. It will host craftspeople, food vendors, farmers, and live art and music from 5 to 10 p.m. Market businesses will also be extending their hours. It's free to attend. And if you want another chance to shop this weekend, the Punk Rock Flea Market is returning to Capitol Hill starting tomorrow through the weekend. More than 200 vendors will be there. You'll have a chance to stock up on punk rock clothes, music, and memorabilia, among other things. A portion of the proceeds will be donated to the Low Income Housing Institute. Entry is $1 per person. We're back with more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. Hiking season is ramping up across Washington state. Seattleites are out trekking and camping in their favorite spots, from the Cascades to the Olympics to local national forests. There are fewer options this season as officials continue to work on repairs from last winter's storm damage and massive flooding. Earlier, we heard about the 29 Pines campground in the Teanaway. A nearby river split and flowed through the camping area. The campground had to delay opening and is still finishing repairs. Now they're hoping to welcome campers by mid-July. Courtney James is a communication manager with Washington's Department of Natural Resources.
Hopefully about half of the campground will be open within the next month, and then that north half will remain closed for the year due to just the extensive flood damage.
Other campsites and trails are also facing delays. Outdoors reporter Gregory Scruggs has been following this for the Seattle Times. He's here to help us learn what we can expect this hiking season. Gregory, thanks so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Good morning.
So we had this huge flooding event this winter, major storm damage. How is this showing up for people? What can hikers expect as they try to hit the trails?
So every spring is always damage control in Washington's mountains after the winter snow melts out. But definitely this year worse than most in terms of the number of forest roads, those unpaved roads that go deep in the mountains and will take you to a trailhead. A number of those, especially ones that run along rivers, washed out during our record-setting atmospheric rivers. And so there are a number of trailheads that are, you just plain can't get there without, adding a dozen miles of road walking to your hike. And a lot of questions about when and how these roads are going to get fixed, some of which had only recently reopened after long closures from the last time they washed out.
All right. Let's get a bit more specific. A lot of Seattleites are used to taking the short drive to the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest for hiking and recreating. What are you hearing about repairs in that area?
Sure. So the Mount Baker Snoqualmie, that's, a good chunk of the Cascades, west of the Cascade Crest and north of Mount Rainier. Indeed, if most Seattleites are going on a hike in the mountains a short drive away, that's probably where they're going. And, some of the highlights for me in terms of these closures, the Index Galena Road, which runs out of Index off of Highway 2, paired with the also washing out closure of the Beckler River Road, means that a very popular alpine lake called Lake Blanca is completely inaccessible. Those were the only two roads that go there, and that's probably one of those top 10-ish alpine lakes that people flock to, and it is just plain cut off. And the sad thing is that the Index Galena Road was only reopened, I think, 2-3 years ago to much fanfare after a long closure and a bunch of work to repair it, and then the river rose up again and ate that road away. Another similar story is the Seattle River Road outside of Darrington. Again, it was out of commission for, I think, closer to 20 years and was reopened sometime back, about a decade back. And then that one washed out, closed again with multiple failure points, including a 70-foot deep canyon that opened up. It cuts off access to parts of the Pacific Crest Trail that are rather remote, so it's tough for search and rescue or hikers that need to bail off the PCT. There's a lot of other trails back there in the Glacier Peak Wilderness. And it's also the Sauk Seattle tribe. They can't even get to their own cemetery, as my colleague Isabella Brita reported earlier this year. So it's a real loss for hikers, for recreation, for tribal communities, and the town of Darrington, which really thrives on summer outdoor recreation tourism.
You brought up the Pacific Crest Trail. That is a very popular thru hike. What is the condition in that area?
Yeah, so I tuned into a webinar last week that the Washington Trails Association hosted, and they brought in a guest who I don't have the opportunity to speak with, I don't think ever, the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest supervisor, so the boss, if you will, of the forest, Erin Uloth. And she said, quote, "The PCT isn't looking good," which is not what you want to hear from the head of a unit of the Forest Service where a big chunk of the PCT runs. She said that is a priority for her team, her crews this summer. There's just so many downed trees, and only now are crews getting to those trails. I mean, even though we had less snow than usual this past winter, it still lingered in the high country as it always does. So some trails are just now melting out, and indeed Forest Service and volunteer WTA trail crews are discovering bridges that are out, hundreds of trees that need to be logged out. I mentioned the access point near Glacier Peak that because of the road outage will not be an option for PCT hikers. There's another important one at the very northern end of the trail called Hart's Pass. It's the highest elevation road in the state of Washington. You get there from Mazama out in the Methow Valley. And that's over on the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. And that road is out at least until mid-July. And Hart's Pass is very useful, popular, what have you, for ferrying supplies and ferrying hikers in and out from the PCT, especially if you've finished the hike. So you reach the border with British Columbia. As of last year, you're no longer allowed to continue into Canada and exit via E.C. Manning Provincial Park. You have to double back right at the U.S.-Canada border, retrace your steps, and for most people, after literally walking all the way from the U.S.-Mexico border, that meant getting off at Hart's Pass and getting a ride into town and having that celebratory beer and finally being done with the PCT. If that road is not fixed on time, then, hikers are looking at even more doubling back before they can be done once and for all with their PCT hike.
Oh, man, I cannot imagine being out there on the PCT and arriving to know you have to double back.
Although, they're a hardy bunch what's another dozen miles when you've already logged, what is it, 1,200, 1,300?
Hiker
maybe
logic.
Maybe it's a rounding error at that point.
Well, you did mention cleanup. You mentioned the Washington Trails Association and the Forest Service. Who is responsible for the majority of this work, and how much is it going to cost the state?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the prime hiking real estate in Washington, at least the places that most people from the Seattle area are likely to go, are generally national forest. That's a much bigger chunk of land than our national parks. So that's federal, right? So the state of Washington is not on the hook for managing and maintaining these roads. But the Forest Service itself, has been pretty cash-strapped in recent years. They're facing the same squeeze as many federal agencies under the current administration. They were really short-staffed. That's something I reported on quite a bit last year. There were a lot of folks who were let go. Some have come back. And the Mount Baker Snoqualmie supervisor estimated, and I would say definitely an estimate. They're literally still doing aerial surveys this month to try to tally up the damage. But she estimated in that webinar last week that there's at least $30 million in damage. She put it 40% of the forest's arterial roads suffered, quote, extensive damage. So I think it's too soon to know whether and how there will be money appropriated. Is there a possibility of some of the federal emergency dollars that the state requested going to the Forest Service? That's a state-federal kind of jurisdiction issue. It's not clear, I would say, at this early stage while we're still tallying up the damage.
Let's talk about the Olympics, Gregory. What's the status there?
From floods to fires, shall we say, from one disaster to another. We didn't have a terribly bad wildfire season in 2025. However, the Bear Gulch fire in the southeast corner of Olympic National Park, which I would like to note was human-caused, entirely preventable. This did not have to happen. It torched a lot of backcountry terrain, a lot of wilderness trails in the Olympic National Forest and Olympic National Park, especially around the staircase entrance to the national park. So that entrance has been closed since last summer. It remains closed. I mean, at one point, wildland firefighters were covering Park Service buildings with, fire-resistant material, fearing kind of the worst-case scenario of the fire, ripping right through the front country area of the park, if you will, where, building structures, bathrooms, campgrounds are. Those survived, but again, because of the general fire damage in the area, still not open. However, I did note that the Park Service posted a volunteer campground host position for Staircase for this summer. And so I did ask them, does that mean you're going to open Staircase? And they hedged. They didn't say yes, but they didn't say no. But it sounds like they are putting preparations in place to at least reopen that part of Olympic National Park, at least the campground area, if not a number of the trails. And that would be good news because on the other side of the park, out on the coast, Rialto Beach is going to close July 8th for, and this is just, routine maintenance. Nothing to do with fires or floods, but also part of the game. So the Mora Road that heads out to that, stunning beach, it's one of the easier places to get to on the Olympic National Park coastline. Like, essentially no hiking involved. You can drive right up to one of those stunning wild beaches with the sea stacks and the tide pools and all that good stuff. So you got to get that one in before July 8th because that'll close for the rest of the summer for road construction.
All right. Where else do you recommend people go to recreate this summer, given everything we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it can seem like we're dealing with issues left, right, and center, and we are, but the Cascades in the Olympics are vast. They're huge. And even a handful of closures, more typical than usual. So you can't go to Blanca Lake this summer. Well, there are dozens of other alpine lakes, right? I mean, the Alpine Lakes Wilderness itself turns 50 this year. And honestly, I think that the Washington Trails Association's Hike Finder is the place that any hiker should start when they're planning their summer outing. The information is so up to date. They crowdsource trip reports. They keep all those road closures and the like and trail closures posted. So, if you go to the Hike Finder, it gives you a map of the state. You can filter by the distance, by the difficulty level. You can click around based on a certain, geographic area you want to go. I'm not one to say, go do this hike or that hike. I think it's more educate yourself by looking at a resource like WTA's Hike Finder and poking around until you find something that suits your fancy.
And I can't let you go without talking about the black bear attack on Mount Si this week. It was rare, but what should we understand about this?
Well, don't get between a mother bear and her cubs, I think is what we should understand. That seems to be the preliminary account of what transpired with these poor hikers who I understand basketball players from Thomas Jefferson High School in Auburn. Many of them, I believe, on their first hike on Mount Si. Certainly a first time to remember. And they were about 2.7 miles up the trail on Tuesday at around 1 in the afternoon. And apparently this mother bear charged at 3 of the hikers, swiped at one of them who was scratched a bit. They fled. I guess there was no further contact with the bear. And, they called for help. King County Search and Rescue assisted. And then the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, their police officers went out on the trail to search for the bear. As of Wednesday, the officers said they had not found the bear. They were suspending the search. And as of Thursday, 8 a.m., the Department of Natural Resources, which manages Mount Si, reopening the Mount Si, Little Si, and Mount Tenerife trails. Though there will be a new addition if you're going to any of those trailheads in the coming weeks or months or who knows how long. There will be some bear-aware signage to remind you that indeed Washington is bear country. There are, in fact, about 22,000 black bears in the state. The species is native to Washington. And at the same time, those attacks are very rare. Roughly 20 documented in the state's history, only one of which led to a fatality. And the last human bear encounter that resulted in injury was 4 years ago. So be bear aware. The standard advice is talk firmly, loudly in a human voice, that kind of, hey, bear, here, bear kind of chatter, so that bears are aware of a human ahead of time. You can raise your arms up if you have hiking poles or a jacket, extend those out so you appear bigger than you are. Don't run away. And, should you feel it appropriate, you could also invest in a can of bear spray, learn how to use that safely, and carry that with you on the trail.
Yeah, it's a good reminder, even though this is rare. Gregory, where are you going to hike or camp this summer?
I'm celebrating a milestone birthday next week, and I am going to attempt to climb Mount Hinman.
Wow.
Followed by a soak at the Goldmeyer Hot Springs.
Oh my gosh, that sounds fantastic. Well, happy birthday early. Good luck. I hope you have a great time out there. Gregory, thanks so much for taking the time.
Indeed, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Before you hit the trail this summer, take a moment to rate and review the show in your favorite podcast app or share this episode with a friend. Today's episode was produced by Anna Marie Yanni. It was edited by Andy Hurst. Our production team also includes Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, Vaughn Jones, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. Talk to you tonight for Evening Headlines.